It's a new year, but it's the same old us. We made the same old mistakes. It's a little early in the year for our Let It Go episode, but tonight we are going to talk about the aftermath of the fantasy football finals. It can be a lot, and there could be a lot of directions you're going to feel like you need to go. But we're going to talk through what we think the first steps are, kind of some mistakes that we hopefully learned from. It's a good day of reflection a couple of days after, like it's the disappointment, the depression, or the excitement and joy of winning has washed over you and you've kind of come back down to your senses. I sit here today as a defeated man. For years, I have held one thing over Jacob's head. It is that he had not beaten me in the playoffs, really ever, and never in high stakes. But 'twas not this year. This year, Jacob sits on this program for the first time, the Frozen Tundra Home League champion. If you listen to the bonus episode, I said Jacob's team was going to score 190 points. I also said that my team would score 156.5. And Jacob said 160 is what he would need. The final score of this game was 159.84 to 185.06. I almost hit that perfect.
I love
on
Tom's
the head.
currently victory lapping, guessing his margin of loss, which is,
is
the only victory lap available to him.
It is because I knew I was toasted in this game, and the 40 points from CeeDee Lamb was the most tilting. Because I knew Saturday I was like, I am so toast. But some championships were won, some championships were lost. We have a lot of learning to do this year. This is going to be a big year for us here on this program. 2024, we're starting the year off as the lead video content for Dynasty, for fantasypoints.com. I just said for Dynasty Points. Oh my goodness. And we're excited. Yeah, of our own program.
We're also the worst content for Dynasty Points, for the best content for Dynasty Points.
Yeah, we're our own best friends and worst enemies for sure. Of course, if you haven't already, go to YouTube, go to fantasypoints.com, subscribe, do everything that you need to do to help us. And hey, since we're still affiliates, if you're looking to buy a new trophy for your newfound championships, use promo code FULLTILT. That's FULLTILT. Yes, absolutely. And use promo code FULLTILT, and you can do that. Is that simply because I wore
have a trophy?
Right.
We already have a trophy, so I can't buy a trophy. I'll already just get to have the trophy. I'll be back in town in February, so I plan to see you guys. I think I'll be back in town during the Super Bowl. Maybe we all get together for the Super Bowl.
Especially if it's Ravens 49ers. Hey.
That'd be very fun. So hopefully we can all get together for the Super Bowl, and I can accept my trophy. But I don't know that just that trophy, eventually next year, because I don't think we don't have like engravings on the trophy, right? Like you just get it for a year, then you have to give it back to somebody.
They're on there. No, they're on there for sure.
There is engravings.
It just depends on if Austin ever gets them put on. So that's kind of your crux.
Well, either way, I'm out here in Vancouver. Most of the league's in Winnipeg. Eventually, I'm not going to win it again, and then I'm going to have to give it to somebody else. Then I'm going to be out here lonely. So I feel like I need something that's just by my side
to commemorate,
reminding me of this triumph. So I'm thinking belts, possibly plaques. We'll see, but there's going to be an order coming into Trophy Snack with promo code FULLTILT in the near future.
Oh my God. I love that. That's also depressing because I lost this game, but nevertheless, guys, I'm excited. Lucas, you said you had a little bit of a rough year this year. I think a few people did, but that's what leads me into the first real question. And Pesky, I see your question. Also shout out Kurt. It's definitely not going to be Brock Purdy this year. The books have already closed on Lamar Jackson.
It's over, as Vince Carter would say.
Yeah. What do you think people's first steps should be? Championships are over. Leagues are about to roll over. The first thing people are going to do is throw 27 players on the block.
Oh, man.
What is the first thing? And it's going to be in every league. You're going to see it. What's the first thing?
I think people should I mean, first off, look,
Oh.
like Dynasty is a pretty year-round game. Like, take advantage of the time off. Personally, like, I just think your mind starts to kind of go crazy. I mean, maybe everybody's different, but at least for me, like towards the end of the year, I just think your brain starts to go a little nuts. Like you're constantly inundated with this weekly cycle of you're stressing over injuries, you're tilting over like missed touchdowns. There's, you're just so enraptured by how the variance of the current season is hitting you. And so I like to just take some time during the playoffs to like decompress. I also think like maybe some people just have better relationships with like how they watch the games, but like watching the game, rooting for fantasy teams is like, in my opinion, like a deeply unpleasurable way to consume football. Like you start rooting for the kinds of things of like, oh, I need this team to like score, but score fast enough that the other team gets it back before the 2-minute warning because I have DeAndre Swift and he won't play during the 2-minute warning, or I have this running back who only plays during the 2-minute warning. So I need like, it's just a really like horrible way to watch football. So I would encourage everyone to like avoiding like I don't want to just stack burnout on top of burnout on top of burnout. So to me, like I would just take this month to just like watch the playoffs, enjoy them, enjoy like football without any fantasy stakes on it, have a good time. And then like come back in February or March with a little bit of a clearer head, and probably a little bit easier to figure out how you feel about all these players when you're more detached, because right now it's like every player is either a guy that you're right about and you're thumping your chest, or a guy you're wrong about and you're inundated with everybody telling you how stupid you are. And it's just good to get away from that. It's like there's nothing you can actually do about it, or at least nothing that you really have to do about it right now. So just getting away and detaching yourself from the emotion of these players that you're right about or wrong about, or won you a championship or lost you a championship. To me, that's like absolutely essential. So I would just take a big, deep breath for a while.
I think that's a good spot to be in if you need to just decompress. There's nothing wrong with that. Making rash decisions a few days after the season has started is not totally recommended. Lucas, what about you? What do you think the first steps are?
I think the first thing you have to do is take stock of what your player values are at this moment in time. Remember that, and then once you come back to this, once everything starts to kick off, people get excited, want to start making moves. They're trying to set up what their rookie drafts are going to look like come March, April timeframe. See what those player values are then. Look at how that's changed. See what's real and what's just the excitement for a new season. Weigh those together and use that to help you make decisions throughout the off season. Make sure you're not just buying someone because somebody wrote a puff piece about them during the off season, or there's some hype that there might be a move made on the team. Think about how they actually are as a player, what they actually mean to your team, then weigh that with what their new value is to help make decisions as you're moving forward. I think Dameon Pierce is a really good example of that right now, mainly because I got burned a lot, so I'm not bitter at all with this. But Dameon Pierce was coming off a decent rookie season. Real competition wasn't brought in. People were starting to get excited for what the Texans could potentially do. They thought, maybe with a rookie quarterback coming in, lean on the run game. They can't be worse than they were last season. And we kind of got lost in that was the fact that they were moving to a new scheme. They also did bring in more competition for the downs that we were really wanting to see Dameon Pierce like actually expand into, the passing down work that Devin Singletary now owns, and just actually think about it. Don't just get excited and follow the hype.
Yeah, that's 100% a good point. I think the point of identifying what the values are right now, super important, because you are about to get bombarded with buy the dip, trust the process, pay whatever for X player. In the Fantasy Points Discord, we've already had questions like, what should I be going and trading for CJ Stroud? Should I trade my late one for wide receiver X? No, I don't think you should. I think dust is going to need to settle. However, I don't really take the break. I use this time. Your first step, I can tell you guys aren't like company men first, because your first step should be going to fantasypoints.com, using the early bird special, getting the Fantasy Points data suite at the cheapest it's going to be all year, and start looking into some of the funny money data. What I mean by funny money data is there are players that I totally understand the points per game is how we should evaluate a player. However, I think every single one of those point per game, like those spike point per game players, need to be diagnosed a little bit deeper on a week-to-week basis in the offseason. Is their points per game boosted by 3 25-point games and everything else is 10 to 11? Go and look at it. I think there are some things that this is the time where people are a little slower on movement, that you get to go and deep dive some of the data that is most important for you to set up your situations. Like Kayleen, yes, tell me I'm wrong for valuing Puka as a top 5 wide receiver, dynasty wide receiver. Really easy to do that right now. He is performing at an unbelievable rate, but in a couple of weeks, are you going to feel the same way? I don't know. So in this situation, are you going to go out and pay for him at that price? I wouldn't suggest it, especially at the cost of first round picks right now. So I think you need to use this time to dive a little bit into the data.
Yeah, I do think you can have certainly some success with market timing this time of year, because you're not actually predicting any future events, right? We're not going to, and well, other than playoff performances, which will swing dynasty value for some players, but especially for the players eliminated from the playoffs, we see every year kind of come in the spring and the summer, we're going to get people that start diving in more to the data, right? And there's going to be, we're going to start seeing, oh, this guy's PFF grade was this guy's yards per route run was that, this guy's RYOE was this, his missed tackles force was that. Like, I've definitely had some success in past years really getting out front to some of those advanced stats all-stars, and the Fantasy Points data suite is the best place to start diagnosing those, where it's not even as much necessarily, like Christian Watson is an example of this last year, where his value rose over the back half of the second year, but then it kind of stagnated, and then it rose a lot more later on as everyone sort of caught on to, oh, like, look at all these numbers. And that was the first example that came to mind, but there's plenty. And that's going to be kind of the case of like a lot of guys where especially some of these more sleeper players that emerge that came out of nowhere, like the ones that have the really standout kind of advanced metrics profiles are the ones that I think you can be pretty confident those guys are going to rise in value as more and more people start publishing that over the offseason, because that's all people really have to do over the offseason. People are going to dive into data like the Fantasy Points data suite. They're going to compile the stuff, and they're going to write their pithy tweets about only this player, and this player hit this mark, and this mark. And, if you can identify some of those guys that you can draft in your startups now or trade for now that you're genuinely interested in, that probably are more likely to get more expensive than less expensive later, that's probably a decent way to spend some of your time.
And if you did that, there are easy ways to find players to completely avoid. We did a video, I posted it today, talking about why not to draft Jalen Waddle in the second round. There was data that you could dive into in Jalen Waddle's production last season that would have clearly identified that he was, as you pointed out, the nesting doll type with same range of outcomes as Devonta Smith, as T. Higgins should he have been healthy, as Michael Pittman Jr. as receiver. So if you get a head start now, you might be able to find those early ADP identifiers that are being drafted too high and will most likely settle back down. And I think that's important. It doesn't hurt to take a break from your leagues a little bit and kind of just put out soft feelers, because we always say to talk about and keep in contact with your league mates. It's a huge advantage.
Just not me. If you send me a trade offer in the next month, I'm not responding to it.
Yeah.
Sorry. It's not happening. It's something
Fair.
personal.
That's fair. But I know, like, for example, guys like Tom Lee or Maddie, they're already planning their next barrage of trade offers to go your
they
way.
sure are.
They're absolutely, and all the power to those types of players. I'm happy to talk through it. I'm a wait and see on my roster type guy, but I am not a wait and see on the data and getting ready to attack ADP. I'm going back and looking at last year's ADP where I drafted some guys, identifying the players that I'm already looking at might be next year's Baker Mayfield round 10 starting quarterback, top 10. Next year's Jordan Love, who you're able to get for, I know, and myself personally, I traded a Travis Kelce for Jordan Love, a 1, and Laporta in June. Right, I'm trying to identify those quarterbacks that are late that could possibly pop in and play. I'm not sitting here saying like, yeah, I totally drafted a ton of Joe Flacco in, round 17 or 25 because I knew he was going to come in and dominate. I'm not saying that, but there are ways to identify murky situations this early, and then also when you find those players that you're identifying, go and check their contract situation. I think that's the next step, is because identifying
that is a big thing.
Yeah,
I would totally agree with that. Like I would chart out, and people actually usually make these charts. You can usually find them, and if I see some folks do it, I'll retweet it. But like I would go through, particularly every quarterback situation, every running back situation, and I would just look at, does this team have a current running back under contract next year? Who is it? Who are the free agents? And the really interesting thing about this year is that the running back draft class is very poor, while the quarterback draft class is potentially very strong. So thinking about that, you sort of look at kind of start dividing people up, like who's locked into a lead gig next year on their current team. Who would you say is locked into a lead gig somewhere? Who would you say is like kind of those fragile incumbents? And who do you think are those names that are maybe not viewed as a very likely starter next year, who actually probably have a slightly better chance than the market might indicate, and getting in kind of early on some of those, even getting in early on some of those backup situations. Like, I think last year was a scenario, especially for people who are more best ball inclined, where some of these small margins might matter a lot. Like, you think about a situation like Alexander Madison is a great situation. Obviously, he doesn't have a good year, but from a closing line value perspective, or just, the chance to kind of draft and potentially dump later, like that information that Dalvin Cook was a likely cut was out there for quite a while before Alexander Madison eventually actually emerges as the starter, right? And so kind of getting ahead of some of that stuff and seeing like who are the guys that are priced like they're definitely a backup, but actually could be a starter. And you're going to get a lot of those wrong because we don't know. But like the Cowboys, is a great example. Tony Pollard not under contract, not an impressive year. What do? Maybe they bring Pollard back. Maybe they roll with Rico. Maybe they draft someone. Maybe they sign someone. My gut would be they probably don't. They're probably not the team that spends up on the Saquon Barkley or the Josh Jacobs, just based on how they've approached that position since that big Zeke mistake. So for me, like, what are the odds, that Rico Dowdle is their week 1 starter? Like, I would say like 30%, which seems kind of crazy, but like, that's a guy I'd want to get on a bunch of teams. And at some point this offseason, it might be a riskier bet where, let's say they do let Pollard walk, they don't sign anyone else major. And now we're in the summer and you're like, do I want to invest a second round pick in Rico Dowdle versus like, kind of like nameless veteran backup or fourth round pick? It's like, I can see how that goes wrong in a hurry. But if you can get him now he's definitely a backup running back, Rico Dowdle price, then it's like no risk. Worst case, you just have yourself like a handcuff on your roster. It's no loss. And best case, maybe you somehow have a starting running back next year.
It was the Jerome Ford effect last year.
Yeah.
You wanted to roster Jerome Ford.
That he was going to be the number 2, but the market took a while to react to that and believe that.
Well, it was going to be, Hunt's coming back. Hunt's going to definitely be back. And then he just never came back. And next thing you know, you had the guy that ended up being a league winner. Easy to identify situations. I will tell you, I think Dallas signs Derrick Henry, but that's just me.
That one was like more plausible because he'd probably be a lot cheaper.
Now it's either gonna
contract.
I think it's either Henry or Josh Jacobs because I feel like Josh Jacobs fits what they want to a
I just think
T.
people
But
have a perception of Dallas as like a boomer organization, and I think they're like the total opposite of that.
No. I just think he's what they want. They want some power and they want some pass catching, and I think Jacobs offers that. And he's not like, well, by age, completely dust. But Derrick Henry as an Eagle would be the worst possible thing ever unless they get rid of that 1 yard plunge because Derrick Henry won't matter. So there you go. DeAndre Swift, man, could we like 1,000 yards, caught passes a bit, and
Not
just robbed of a top 10
passes for like the first half of the season, and then he completely stopped doing that.
I think that's a Jalen Hurts injury situation, but that's besides the point.
I think it's that
robbed.
AJ Brown is holding a gun to Jalen Hurts' head every series and saying like 3 targets or it's over, big boy. And I think that he looked at that and was like, all right, DeAndre, like I can't give you any targets. I have to give your targets to AJ Brown or he's literally going to harm me and my children.
But like 50, damn near 50 targets for Swift, 1,000 yards in that offense, and he can't put up better than like an RB17 season is crazy to me.
Yeah, that was one this past offseason. Like, as soon as the season was over, I was almost in panic mode trying to move my Swift shares. Just because, like, didn't know what his future was going to be in Detroit, just from a usage standpoint. Didn't even realize, like, at that point in time that they were looking to move on from him, but sold him, I think, for a first and a little bit on top. It felt a little
gross. Are people
gross,
finally done with the Swift martyr shit now? Like, are people finally done with the, like, he's this incredible talent, he's been hard done by all these coaching staff?
Hold on. Weren't you, like, pumping him up all year?
Like, I
Mr.
thought he had,
Swift?
so, I mean, I still don't like this guy as a player. But I don't know. I've always had, like, a up and down relationship with Swift. I think that I got what the player is pretty correct, which was that I was, like, throughout the Lions, I was like, this guy is not it. And then on the Eagles, I stayed very out in Dynasty. I think I have 1 share. I was pretty in best ball where I was like, I think this scheme could fit and I think they're going to score points. Which, like, yeah, as an 8th round best ball pick, he was pretty good. I wish that he came up bigger in the finals. It would have been nice to have an extra $10,000 if he scored like 4 more points. But other than that, he did his job in best ball. But I think he is what he is. You know, I think his play suffered from, or his effectiveness suffered from the Eagles' offense no longer kind of being that unstoppable force that it was last year and early in the season, where like when they can just get that zone read going and they have all this space to operate, like, you know, you watch Swift in the open field, he's still dynamic. And he always will be until his athleticism goes. As a like outlet player, I think people are always like, why is he not using the 2-minute drills? Because that's not really his game. Like, he wasn't in Detroit, wasn't there. He's a good pass catcher, he's a good space player. And as the run game closed up, you know, then it relies more on making efficient decisions, and he doesn't do that very frequently. So
right,
it is what it is. We'll see. He'll be fine. He'll be in the NFL next year. He's going to be one of these. He's going to be one of these guys. I mean, it's going to be roulette, but like Swift is one of several backs this year where normally I'd feel a lot worse about them going into the offseason than I do, who's really benefited from how bad this draft class is, right?
Yeah,
like
and a poor free agency as well, really.
I think it's a pretty good free agency class. I mean, we're getting Jacobs, we're getting Barkley for sure, and then like some of these guys are like, you know, washed or borderline washed, but we're gonna get
True, Pollard,
like
Jacobs,
Henry, Pollard. We're gonna get Mixon probably.
True,
potentially getting Kamara. We'll see what happens with that.
Broken
so
Eckler,
interesting free agency class. Yeah, Eckler. So. You know, depends on how washed you think all these guys are, but like in terms of at least name value, you're getting a lot of name value.
Yeah, too true. Yeah, absolutely. I guess you're right in that case. Also, I just want to address this where Kurt says Derrick Henry on the Eagles is going to be the plus version of what Gus Edwards is.
They actually hand the ball off.
I think
on the Ravens.
I think you're horrifically underestimating how good Gus Edwards is compared to Derrick Henry, who needs 8 yards clear in front of him to be able to gain 2. So he's dust. He's one of the slowest moving players I've ever seen in my life at this point in Derrick Henry. You need a system where it's just run in a straight line, which is
I
Baltimore.
mean, I think he would do well in the
but
Eagles.
I don't even.
I think he'd have enough time to get like. He's still good when he gets the legs churning. It's just like he takes
just
a
needs
while to get to top speed, right?
That's
like
what I
he needs
mean.
A free path, and then once he gets up and moving, he's still good. He just has no like acceleration anymore. But I
Eckler
think
played
he
on
had
the.
success on the Eagles. It's just that it wouldn't be Gus because like the whole thing with Gus is that they get down to the 1 yard line and they don't pass and they don't run Lamar. They hand off to Gus 80% of the time.
Yeah,
the Eagles
and he's dominant.
have no intention of doing anything except just pushing at the 1 yard line.
Yeah, it says Eckler is slower. Eckler also played the most of the year on a high ankle sprain, so I don't think Eckler is as dust as some people think. That team ass and the high ankle sprain. High ankle sprains kill young running backs, and let alone a 28-year-old running back.
Do you remember Barkley like 3 years ago? How like disgustingly bad he was.
Yeah.
That year where it's like, and I get he was also coming back from an ACL, but like I think people misremember that season where he had 2 really good games in, I think it was week 3 and week 4 post that ACL. And I thought he was just going to come on and kind of do what Breece Hall did, where it was like take a month to get up to speed and then just like dummy fools. And then he gets the high ankle sprain and then he comes back and he looks like a total corpse. And then he comes back the next year and was great, right? And now he's had 2 productive years after that. So I don't know. Eckler's way older, but I'm always pretty cognizant that the high ankle sprain can really zap a running back.
And we want pass catchers too, right? I mean, Alvin Kamara looked dusty as hell running the ball, but that dude just caught passes like
all year this year, but he caught a million passes.
Right, and that's what we're looking for. And that could actually be the next thing. I think that there are a ton of guys, like obviously there's obvious cases. We want to buy Tajay Spears. We want to buy that guy. He is the second most catches by a rookie running back ever, next to LaDainian and Tomlinson. Crazy. We want that guy. Everyone's going to want that guy. So targeting that guy is probably going to cost you a lot more than what some of these vets could end. You could bargain bin these guys the second your league rolls over if you really felt like you needed to. Understanding what that risk is, Eckler, Henry, Jacobs, these guys are going to be cheap. And if you feel like stockpiling those guys on your bench and are okay taking that massive hit if nothing pans out for them, sure. I would say those are the early offseason targets more than maybe the Tajay Spears, the Devon Achane, Kyron Williams. These guys are just going to be jacked up in price. Like, I don't like to do like, I saw on Twitter, someone was like, target Kyron Williams. He's going to be a top 10 dynasty back this year. Sure. Then why am I targeting him after he just scored 3 touchdowns in the finals? Do you think that dude's letting him go for less than 2+ first value? No fucking chance. You have a better chance of that later when they sign a free agent or they draft some guy that's going to, quote, challenge his workload, whatever. There's just times for targets, and those aren't the guys. These aging vet dudes that you could roll the dice on early and maybe ship off some mediocre wide receivers, Jerry Jeudy, with a little bit of extra, sure. If you really need to make a move, those would be the more targets that I'm looking for because they're going to be ambiguous. Same thing with the contracts. Look at Alvin Kamara's contract. Look at everyone on the Saints contracts. Those guys are so over the cap, everyone's gone. Go look at what Kendre Miller's doing. Go look at what Jamal Williams' contract is like. These are the times where you can really bolster with these things. And then I would just be saying attack the tight end position vigorously. That's one thing I learned this year is to just attack that position. I attacked the tight end position harder than any other year, which is kind of crazy, Jacob, if you think about it, because I am Mr. Tight End and have been Mr. Tight End since we started playing this funny game. But I learned a hard lesson not to doubt George Kittle this year. That dude has #juice like crazy. I thought he was done. Boy, was I freaking wrong. Unbelievable year, 65 receptions, 1,000 yards. Absolutely insane in that offense with Brock Purdy. I definitely doubted. Learned my lesson. Learned my lesson believing in Dallas Goedert. Learned my lesson in not rostering Evan Ingram. Attack this position. Even the guys like Greg Dulcich and Chig who are like underwhelming, you you still attack those guys because they're so cheap. So I would attack the tight end position. I think guys like Hawkinson, who blew their knee out, is a good buy. Guys like Andrews, who have been hurt for a while. Even Travis Kelce, who died at the end of the year, he's going to be unbelievably cheap if you're willing to stack cheap options. Those are the moves you make this time of the year while you break down the data. These young guys, like Jacob mentioned, all going to skyrocket. That's not a maybe. It's just a fact. Everyone's going to see the flashy youth and whatever. It's just a fact. Guys like Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson are going to drop in some value because young receivers, Neighbors, and Marvin Harrison are going to move up, and it's just a time to really sink this in. Go and observe the landscape because we've been just locked in our own booths. I think that's the best way I can put it. Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
I think that's great. We're going to take a quick second. When we come back, I'm going to ask these guys a very personal fantasy football question. I don't know if they're going to like it or not.
Is it our ROI?
Oh, we'll talk about that in a minute, too. We're going to be right back. Sit tight. Oh, my God. It's actually funny that you mentioned that because Boots had said, sorry, but I can't listen to this until I see full transparency and ROI from each host.
You want to touch on this?
Yeah, I absolutely want to touch on this.
Okay. Like I didn't get into it on Twitter because, I mean, here's the thing, right? Like, so my personal take on it. I will be posting my like league by league results and ROI on my Substack. I don't intend to do it on Twitter. The reason for that is like I think that the people who legitimately pay for my advice have a right to know how I do in my leagues. I already did that with best ball like 2 weeks ago when we went advanced to pools. I said how many I got into each tournament overall. Then I said how many I got into the semis, into the finals. After this week, I'll say how I did in the finals, 60th. Anyway, and in Dynasty, I'll do the same. How many playoffs, finals, whatever. For anyone who cares on the show, my ROI was plus 61%. The reason I don't really like doing on public of Twitter is, first of all, so the big thing is, okay, what do people get out of it?
Yeah.
So tangibly, I think the transparency has some legitimate value in that people who pay for your product should have somewhat of a right to understand how you did. I'm not super sure that the ROI stuff is like necessarily the best way to do that.
No.
I think realistically, if you've been delivering advice via podcast or article or whatever form you relay content to your consumers, they probably already have their own conception of whether or not you gave helpful advice. Like they have already listened to what you said or read what you said about certain players, and they probably already know in their head like what you said that was helpful or what you said that was unhelpful. So I don't think that like saying your ROI necessarily helps a lot of that, but I understand the general concept behind it. The reason I think that it's generally unhelpful on Twitter is first of all, like following me on Twitter is free. It's entirely voluntary. I don't actually feel any sense of accountability to my Twitter followers, like just to be entirely honest. People can follow me on Twitter at any time. It have very minimal effect on my life. And if they wish to unfollow me, I assume it would probably have a pretty minimal effect on their life. What does happen though, is that you get people who, the people who are going to be most inclined to share their ROI in any field, not just Dynasty, whether it be stock picking, Dynasty, fantasy football, best ball, DFS, whatever. There's going to be a selection bias effect where obviously the people who are most inclined to share are the people who had particularly good years. And then what ends up happening is everybody starts looking at all these people who do really good. And probably a lot of people end up not feeling overwhelmed with their gratitude towards everyone's accountability and transparency that is like entirely unverifiable. They could just be putting numbers out of their ass completely. Mm-hmm. They probably just end up feeling bad about themselves because the average of people who are openly gloating to thousands of Twitter followers about how much money they made is absolutely certain to be a higher ROI than the average player overall. So generally, you're just making people kind of feel worse about themselves.
Yeah.
Also, like I can just say, because I am in leagues with people who are the most adamant about posting their ROIs and their league results, and whether or not it's certainly not the case for all people, because I know some people who I'm in several leagues with that do this that are some of the greatest managers and people every year. I'll shout out one is Mike Soltan, who makes a lot of money in Dynasty.
Yes.
I'm in a very high number of leagues with him. I see
Great
it
player.
over the course of a portfolio that guy is sustainably profitable and is terrific. And if you pay for his Patreon and listen to his Dynasty advice, I think that you would be well served to do so. I won't name the other names on the other side of the equation, but I can say that I'm in leagues with some people who gleefully post their league totals and how many playoffs they make and how many leagues they win every year and their ROI. And one of the ways that they do that is they orphan about 20% of their leagues every single year and then join new startups and then usually don't have very many futures. And then each year they just continually siphon off their worst teams and add new teams, which shockingly is a pretty great way to have an ROI.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's positive. It's also, I think, the whole Dynasty ROI thing is very different than posting your best ball ROI or your DFS ROI. In DFS, we all have the same contests to choose from. On Underdog, like if you're posting how many best ball mania teams you advanced, well, everybody is competing in the same tournament under the same rules with the same set of people. And I mean, I've posted my thoughts about advance rates before, but whatever, you post your advance rates, you post your finals rates, you post your whatever with regards to Best Ball Mania. It's a very tangible measure of exactly what you say that you're measuring, because everyone is competing in the exact same tournament under the exact same rules. And if your advance rate is X and mine is Y, and X is higher than Y, it's probably legitimately better. In Dynasty, of course, that's not the case. You're competing with 11 completely different individuals. I can say that if my, depending on how you select your leagues, whether that be exclusively with analysts, whether that be exclusively with buddies from your home league, whether that be exclusively with people off of forums, your ROI is going to change dramatically. I can certainly tell you that, my leagues, for instance, with patrons who like actively know all of my rankings and player takes and strategy points, is like my edge is infinitely lower than it would be if I was just like dropped anonymously into a forum league, right? And that's going to be the case for a lot of Dynasty analysts, but it's very variant. So my point being is I don't think it actually even tells you that much, because every league is so variable. I don't think that posting about it actually creates positive incentives. I think it makes consumers feel worse often, and I think that it encourages analysts to behave poorly in leagues. And then I think that in terms of what you're actually trying to do, I don't know. I just don't know that that's actually that effective of a way of being accountable with your subscribers, when I think that there are other or more direct ways. So that's my thoughts on it. I'm not like doing that to say like every person who's posting it is a bad person. But that's just my personal thoughts on this whole debate. I think that every person should ultimately do what they think is best for the people who rely on them. And the people who realistically have a right to ask for your accountability in whatever fashion they want to are the people who pay for your product. So any person who subscribes to Thinking About Thinking is entitled to ask me basically any non-offensive and non-invasive question they want, and I'll give them a reasonable answer, and they can expect and will get a full write-up and review of my process, and they can ask any questions they want. But that's why I reserve it for there and not do the whole Twitter backslapping.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. I'll say this. Just to expand on what you said, I don't care if people have to leave leagues. I mean, if you're unhappy in whatever league you're in, leave. Because there's nothing worse than a dead owner that just doesn't check it. I'll firmly believe that. If you're just unhappy, there's going to be someone else happy to be there. I think that there are just better ways to do it. I think you don't just dip. I think that you should be mindful if you're leaving about, as you mentioned, starting another 20. and being in that, I think that there are a handful of repeat offenders for this, that every time we see them pop in, we go, yeah, we know. And we make fun of them for it. And it's fine. But if you're unhappy in a league, then I feel like there are three ways to do it. You can be a dick and you can just dip and wash your hands clean regardless of the status of your team. You can let the commissioner know that I'm willing to pay the next year, which I think should be a standard. I'll pay that next year, especially if you don't have futures, and I'll leave. It'll make it easier for you to find someone, or you find someone and have them pay for it, especially if you don't have any futures. Done. That's it. It's that easy. It's that simple. And I think after that point, I think it is nobody else's business as to why you've chosen to leave. I am leaving every league this year that I have taken on as an orphan. If I have taken on an orphan, I'm leaving. I know that I have to do this because I have to focus on every league that is full tilt and the future fantasy points leagues. I'm fully aware of that. I'm not as invested in those teams. Some people live for orphans. I don't, and I am one. So I totally understand that it's just not for everyone. I thought it was. I've reached out to those commissioners. I've offered to pay for my next year. I'm ready to dip. And someone else is going to appreciate that league. That's it. I don't feel guilty about it. There's no two other ways about it. I know what I have to do, and that's what I'm doing. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's how it should be done. As for pure transparency about your results, like Jacob said, I think there's other ways to do it that don't make people, as he mentioned, feel terrible about themselves. In the Fantasy Points Discord, we get a lot of, should I trade this player for this player? Should I trade this player for this player? And we answer those questions as best we can, and we try to do it through theory, and sometimes our theory ends up being incorrect. And what do? You don't just wash your hands of it and dust it off. I personally, as Jacob said, he's doing a write-up. I post my terrible trades in a thread in our Fantasy Points Discord, which is free at the moment. If you want to go in, I have a whole thread about trades that I've made, when I trade them, what the process was about it. And I do it for almost every trade that I make. I reference the league, started how many, and then in this offseason, guess what I'm doing? I'm going back over. We talked on the show about how good I felt about trading for Kelsey, Diggs, and Stafford to lead my team in the Promised Lands, and it would have just been better off for me to ride Gardner Minshew in the frickin' finals, like Jacob said it would be. And guess what trade I'm going to go over and talk about? Fucking that one. Like, I think that's the best way, in my opinion, to show your transparency. And you're right. I don't think you should have to post it all over Twitter. I don't think you have to post it all over to push your chest out. And don't worry, it'll end up on Reddit anyway, whether you want it to or not, because Reddit is a cesspool of human beings. But I think there are better ways to be transparent, but you do have to. On this show every year, we do multiple shows talking about our terrible and god-awful Trey Lance decisions. How I have made fun of myself for years for trading you Lamar Jackson for Trey Lance and a bunch of other shit. That has been an open joke made all across Twitter and on this show, all over the place. To me, that's the way to do it. But you're right. The ROI, I think there was... Harstead said something great where he said, like, he plays for fun. He doesn't play in money league. That's not why he plays. I think it's important to understand why people play. Do you play to make a living off of it? Do you play to have a good time? Do you play to hang out with your buddies more? To see your buddies more? Is it $5? Is it $10? Is it free? I don't want to play in free leagues. I understand that people do, and they're just as active as people who pay for them. I think that judging people on how they show their ROI is judging people on why they play, and I think that that's not our fucking job. So leave people alone. And as I say all the time, maybe just don't think you're better than other people. I think that's about all I have to say about it. And no, it's not directed at anyone. It's just that I say that on this program all the time. Just be fucking nice to people. I don't think it's difficult. Lucas?
Fair enough. I mean, if we want to really look at my ROI, it's not good.
You had a
very
rough
bad
year.
this year.
You
Yeah,
had
it
a
was a
rough
rough year, but I already knew that going in. Like, just I knew that I'm not in the same number of leagues as you all are in. I have 7 Dynasty / Devi leagues just because that's what my time allows me for, to like feel like I'm as into them as I want to be into them.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that it was going to be a rough year for a lot of them because I was setting up stuff for the future after already having a good year. So it's like, I don't need to explain to people that I didn't win any championships this year because I'm a bad player or anything like that. My process just meant that after I had a really good season, I'm cycling through players, and I love starting over and building it back up from scratch. I'm hoping that next year's going to be a really good year. Tried to get into the playoffs in one league. I didn't do well because Sam Howell
Turned back into a pumpkin.
Yeah. So, it is what it is. I still had fun with it. And that's the whole point of why you play. I understand that if you are investing and spending your time and listening to us talk about fantasy football and trying to have the best resources available to make the most informed decisions in your fantasy leagues, you want people to give you advice that's worth listening to, that's worth paying for. And I think, at least for this show, all of us can say that we have given advice that we think is the absolute best advice that we can possibly give you to do what you need to do in your leagues to be successful. So I think that that's just where we are. We'll see next year. Maybe instead of only being in the playoffs in 1 out of 7 leagues, I'll be in playoffs in 7 out of 7 leagues. So we'll see what it is. We're having fun. And I think that's what.
Well, should we?
Most important.
Should we segue into the worst advice we gave this year?
Ooh.
Yeah, I think we absolutely should segue into the worst advice this year. Do you have something in mind? I know I do.
Sure. So, I won't. I'm 1/3 of a 1-hour show, so I won't have the time to go on the full spectrum of all of my misses. And
no, that'll be a whole show.
Will be. So you'll get that in article form, or probably multiple articles. When I do that article, what I always try to do when I analyze my misses is I try to sort between misses in which I got the end result wrong, but I don't think I would change anything from the process. And then misses in which I felt that it was indicative of some sort of process error. And the reason I try to split them is you're simply never going to have 100% of your takes right in a given year or anywhere close to that. So I think if your takeaway from your misses is, to try and stop making that, whatever that mistake was, you can't go back and change it. So what would have led you to avoiding that miss? And then do you think that that's going to lead you to making more mistakes or less mistakes in the future?
Yeah.
Or both the same? Because oftentimes you can just end up relearn or trying to learn lessons from everything. And then you do what's called overfitting, where basically if you try to, if you have a bunch of plots on a line and you try to have the line of best fit, or if you have a bunch of plots on a graph and you try to create what's called the line of best fit, right? What best calculates that trend. It's not going to hit all of the different dots, right? That would be like a weird, ridiculous, squiggly line. And so you're just trying to minimize your error as much as you possibly can. You don't want to overfit. So with that said, I'm not going to just list through, every single player take that was wrong. But I think that so I tried to think on it and think of, okay, what's what are a couple of process issues that I think maybe explain multiple of my misses and that I think would be good to change. And the root of this, honestly, every single year that I've played fantasy football, and what is probably the closest thing that I have, if I have one New Year's resolution for next year's fantasy season, it's that when I come back on the What I Got Wrong podcast or the What I Got Wrong article, is I know that I will get stuff wrong, that's for sure. And I'll get process stuff wrong and players wrong. But what I really hope the root cause of a mistake next year is not being humble enough. I would like that for the first time to eventually be. I feel like I get closer every year to understanding how little I know, but I would really like to get all the way there. And what that relates to this year is, I think there were 3 players in mind, and I'm sure people could think of others. But 3 players really stick out for me, where in one of Ben Gretsch's articles, he uses this incredible metaphor that's always stuck with me of kind of tying it to, like, from the show Loki, of like these different nodes in time that each event can take. And that's how I try to view sort of each input that we get throughout a season, right? One guy has one good game. What does that mean? Well, it could mean that he is a great player. It could mean that that was a fluky game. It could mean whatever. And what we try to decipher is we get this limited set of information, and we try to predict, of all of the different paths, right, hypothetical paths that this game could sit along. And if people are listening, I'm kind of making these swooping lines showing all these different potential paths, right? You know, think about every surprising good game that you've seen, and think about all the different paths of careers, right? Think about Puka Nakua's first game. Think about the Jonas Gray game and every single incredible game that's in between those 2 games, right? And all of the different paths that these different careers could take. And we are trying to figure out what's the most likely one, or maybe more beneficially, what's the most impactful one that we would want to latch onto or avoid. And I think with a few players, and the ones that stick out are Kyron and Puka and Jordan Love, but I'm sure that there's others, is where we sort of got some piece of information pointing in one direction, and there was other information that pointed in other directions. And what I often kind of went reverting to was latching on to the portion of what the information was that best supported my priors. So for Kyron, for instance, you know, here's a guy in the summer where and he wasn't a guy I was like totally out on. I drafted him a good deal, but mostly I drafted him on the mindset of he'll play third downs, a 2-minute drill, and maybe a little bit else because Cam Akers isn't that good. But I definitely wrote, I was like, this would not be the case where you'd expect a ton of contingent value out of this profile. And then he comes out early, and in his first stretch of starts, there's a lot of great fantasy production, great role, pretty bad underlying metrics. And you know, there's countless running backs who early in the season have bad underlying metrics. And I usually say things like, don't worry too much about it. First month of the season, these metrics are super, super noisy. They're even more noisy in small samples. Like, either trust your eyes or trust the track record, or trust what this, this individual context of this player. And so for me, it was kind of looking like, yeah, okay, he's getting this role, and players have gotten roles for a while, but it's probably not going to stick because he's probably not all that great. And then what happens is he ends up excelling in all these metrics over the rest of the season, right? And that was really the scenario that I didn't particularly foresee.
Yeah.
And I could go through this individually for each of these players. But Jordan Love is another example where he starts hot and then he goes ice cold. And for me, where I didn't have a very high prior on Love, it was very easy to be like, well, I believe the ice cold part, not the red hot start part, because I didn't think he was going to be very good. And now it seems like we have a sample of him being good and a sample of him being not good. And I'm going to pick the one that backs up what I already believed about him going in. And so I'm not saying that, look, I'm certainly not saying that everyone should have seen like the week 3 Kyron situation and their conclusion should have been, this guy's like going to be a total stud. I think that would be the example of entirely overfitting to the result. But what I look at from a process perspective is next year, as we start to get this conflicting data, is try to sort out exactly what percentage my priors are holding in coming to these conclusions versus the data that we're actually seeing. And I don't think that priors should be like abandoned or tossed aside, and we should just act like every game of football is the first one you've ever watched. But I think I can do a much better job of sorting that out, and trying to not look for anything in the profile that lets me to just dispose of what doesn't cut with the grain. So that's my submission.
I think that's great. I think one of the things you're talking about is one of the things I really worked on before this season. So I'm going to piggyback on that. I removed having a strong player take from the players that I liked or didn't like. And I really just tried to look at situations, data, and probability. And in that, I reached out to a lot of people to help me get there. A lot of guys like Scott and Graham and Brett and Jacob and Lucas. And just a lot of people I reached out to talk to more openly about these things. My greatest downfall was not trusting those things. I was either right early and I flipped off of it because I didn't trust it, or I didn't believe in what my priors were to the point that I bought players that I, in my heart, had a feeling I would regret. I knew I was out on Javonte Williams this year. Then I watched 2 games of Javonte Williams and went, nah, I think he's still got the juice. Now I'm screwed. Lucas fleeced me outright on a Javonte Williams trade because I was like, no, I'm going to believe again. I've seen enough. I know. I should have trusted myself. And in not trusting myself, I basically told other people not to trust me in those things as well. So this last year, I changed on having strong or not having strong opinions on just the players to just looking at everything else to now this year. My biggest fault was not trusting myself. I am just going to do that. I am going to trust myself, and in doing that, it will help me sharpen that process to keep it shorter. Lucas, your biggest mistake this year?
I think it's a very similar thought process to what you all were saying, and
Typical.
I was kind of removing what my player thoughts were, especially as somebody who loves to watch college football. Trying to remove my priors on players before I was looking at them and trying to look at them through a lens of, I know nothing about this player other than what the NFL thinks of them and what the market thinks of them, and let that try to drive my decisions. It led to me getting a ton of Quentin Johnston, and that was kind of sad. I stand by my process in that, in terms of, I was saying that he was going to be the safest wide receiver pick in the draft. His value, I don't think, is as low as it could have been, just because of the perception behind him still, as a big guy who runs fast. He's just not been good.
No, he's been terrible.
Need to actually incorporate more of what does this player actually look like into my thought process, instead of just looking at them pretty much blind and saying, here's our data point from the NFL saying, here's how we value them. Here's our data point from the fantasy community. Here's how we value them. And here's a whole bunch of metrics to describe them that aren't actually about how good at football they are. So definitely trying to incorporate some other information into my processes, still have somewhat of an opinion before I'm making decisions, and just moving forward. Lots of learning opportunities this season, a whole awful lot, and hopefully it's not too late to make up for them.
I think that's 3 great points about what we did wrong. And you want transparency? There it is. Like, we're not perfect in this game. So there you go. We have no problem talking about it. Quick question here from Bindles before we get into player picks. The last player picks to decide the finals. Bindles wants to know Rookie 107 or Trey McBride.
McBride.
Interesting. Jacob.
I'm trying to do the math here. Probably would roll with McBride.
Interesting.
But very close.
What's up, Kieran? I think it changes for me for tight end premium. I think the idea of like possibly getting like
tight end premium.
Yeah, me too.
Premium, I would go 107.
Me too. I just I like the idea of possibly getting like Neighbors there. I really think that this dude would be the wide receiver.
Getting him there.
I'm just trying to think of what are the top 7 picks of this year's draft likely to be. Caleb, May.
Basically, in terms of, so we can lock in Caleb, May, Marvin as a lock.
Bowers.
And then I think Daniels is going to be, seems very likely to get the draft capital that he would need to get. And if he does, then that becomes, I think, a clear top 4, the 3 quarterbacks and Marvin. And then I don't think Neighbors can fall any.
Well, Bowers, Penix.
I've always assumed that Neighbors is one of the top 5 picks. A Daniels coming in will definitely change that a little bit. It might push him down to 6, but I don't think there's going to be very many leagues where Neighbors is still sitting there at 107. At least in leagues that I'm in. If I have the 106 and Neighbors is there, that's going to be a pretty good pick.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And Jacob's also frozen now, so
yeah, I was about to say,
okay.
did we lose Jacob there?
Yeah, he'll come back, and when he comes back, we'll be doing player picks. Unless his computer died, in which case I'll read off his player picks for him. Right now, I think I'm going to hold the... Man, tight end premium, I'll take Trey McBride. I'll tell you that. But I'll just preface this by saying... What up, Kieran? I'll just preface that by saying now is not the time to trade away your first-round rookie picks. So I think there's also that, but I think Trey McBride is legitimately him. There he is. As I had mentioned previously... on this program before Jacob called me a liar. But I do have Trey McBride tight end, drum roll, 5. He is tight end 5 for me right now. So in a startup. You're doing a startup already?
Oh my goodness.
Jesus Christ. You're a degenerate, Bindles.
Goodness.
Kieran, I get to listen to the full in my car ride. It will be up on Spotify for you tomorrow, Kieran. So you can definitely do that. Welcome back. It's in a startup. It's in the context of a startup. That like you're already going, dude.
Oh my God.
All the power to you.
I can't handle that.
No, that's he just said just took Breece Hall at 306 in a startup. Ask me anything.
Oh my God.
Why are you the way you are?
This happens to me every year where like I always want nothing to do with fantasy football at this time of year. And like every year in theory, playoff basketball and fantasy tournaments are like my favorite format. And then every year I'm like come like week 15 and 16, I'm always like, why don't I do more of them? Like, why do I usually only have like 30 or 40 teams? And then I like forget just how much I hate fantasy football by this week. And it's like, I know in 3 weeks, I'm going to wish that I had spent this whole time, like the Clockwork Orange, just like drafting teams, but there's like nothing I want to do less right now. Although ironically, I promised Daniel Raz that as soon as I'm finished recording this podcast, I'm going to rip gauntlets with him for an hour. So
love that. Absolutely love it. Yeah, you're a degenerate, Bindles, but we love it because you're the type of person that's consuming the content that we're putting out at this stage of the year. So as much as we call you a degenerate or ask you what's wrong with you, we also love you because we need it. Guys, we have one last week of player picks that will determine who chooses the beverage for whatever day of draft coverage that we get. And I know Lucas needs to win this because he's not a drinker. So this is going to be clutch for him that he needs to hit this. I'm terrified of this because I watched what you did to Billy. So I am scared for this. You are actually in the lead after struggling.
Don't call it a comeback.
Don't call it a comeback. You are now in the lead. So Jacob, with that, your lineup, for anyone that doesn't know, the winner of this contest that we have every year, because we're Dynasty, but we need something to keep us in the mix, we'll pick the drinks of the other person on draft night. What we do is we pick a quarterback and a running back outside of the top 15, a wide receiver outside of the top 24, and a tight end outside of the top 10. We don't do defenses and kickers because they shouldn't be in fantasy football to begin with, in my opinion, and because I push the buttons, that's how we roll. So, Jacob, who are the players that are going to total enough for you at the end of this week to push you over the edge here? Are you playing it safe or are you going hard?
I always thought.
Because you haven't done it yet? Okay, that's fine. I'm ready to go. Third place is me after leading almost the whole year. I have 594.24 points, which not going to be enough to take the lead. I am behind. I, of course, am going with former Baltimore Ravens legend and now Cleveland Browns legend, Joe Flacco, because somehow he's outside of the top 15. Don't think he should be at this point, but they have him there. So I'm rolling Joe with Flacco. I'm going with Isaiah Pacheco, who gets the Chargers. May not play a lot, but they really don't have any other backs to play anyway. So I'm rolling with Pacheco. I don't see Pirine playing X%, and the Chiefs do need to win this game, I feel like. So I'm rolling Pacheco. I'm going to go Pickens against Baltimore. Baltimore is probably going to be playing quite a few backups, especially on the back end with how banged up they are. Pickens seems to be allowed to push off, and I don't know if you guys know, but Brad Allen's the referee for this game. So there's going to be so many pass interference calls not called on Pickens. Here comes the 50-yard stiff arm from Pickens down the field for a long touchdown. I need that kind of upside, and with that, I'm also going to take a position that absolutely chews up Baltimore, and that's tight end. I'm taking Pat Freiermuth. Baltimore gets absolutely pumped by tight ends. They could not care less about a tight end releasing late in their rush. They let absolute bums and nobodies catch 12-yard passes when it's 3rd and 18 all day. That could be Freiermuth. And Mason Rudolph has actually been the best quarterback for the Steelers all year. So the Steelers could put up a decent point total again with Baltimore not really needing this game. Because I don't know if you guys know this or not, but motherfucking Baltimore is the number 1 seed in the AFC, baby. And that's just how it rolls. It's through Baltimore. Lucas, you are second at 601 points. Who do you have rolling this week?
So I was trying to target the matchups where teams still really had something to play for, and I didn't care who they were really going against. And a team with a quarterback in our range who I think has everything to play for and just trying to pour on points is going to be the Minnesota Vikings and Nick Mullins. They let him throw 22 times after halftime. Yes, they were down by 30, but I have a feeling they're going to let him throw 30 plus times against a not good Detroit secondary that doesn't really have a ton to play for, hoping he can pull or pile on the points there. At running back, talked about him a little bit earlier in the show today, going with Devin Singletary against Indianapolis. Should be a really good game, battling to see who's going to actually get into the playoffs there. Hopefully getting 1 or 2 touchdowns would be fantastic. And even if he doesn't get into the end zone, looking for a solid couple of targets there to at least buoy that position. Looking at wide receiver, this was the one I feel the worst about, but I'm rolling with it, and that's going to be Jackson Smith and Jigba. Yeah, touchdown last week. Didn't really have a ton else. Still, Seattle is fighting for their playoff lives against a not great Arizona secondary, and all I need is a touchdown. Give me at least 3 targets. Give me some easy touchdown. I'm going to be a happy man. And then coming off of a massive week with a team that still has a lot to play for, in the Buffalo Bills, give me Dalton Kincaid. So got a lot of desperate teams in my picks, got a lot of desperate players with really good chances to show out. So we'll see. We'll see if this can be my strongest week of the season.
Yeah, that's what I feel like that's what you need at this point, really. Teams that are still going to play.
Yep. Yeah, this was a tough week. Like, I'm looking through some of these names outside of the provisional limits. And I mean, it's absolutely ugly when you consider just how many of these names are either like might play half a game or just suck. But quarterback, give me the Ty God, Tyrod Taylor.
He's been good.
Philadelphia Eagles defense has been just total trash. They're getting lit up by everyone. They're especially getting lit up on explosive plays. And that's where Tyrod still thrives. He still throws a very pretty deep ball. Give me, in a win and in game, Aaron Jones for the Green Bay Packers. Since coming back from this latest injury, he looks rejuvenated. He's had his best rushing performances of the year in back-to-back weeks. I think that they're going to continue to lean on him with a very injured receiving core. I don't know who is going to be healthy out of Watson and Wicks and Reed, all of whom are dealing with stuff right now. And then at the wide receiver position, this is a really gross call that could easily go for 0 points. But I truly am looking. And it's outside the top 24, right? I'm not making that up.
Yeah.
And it's like outside the top 24, like it's horrid. Like it's either players in horrendous matchups or it's players that are totally bad, or it's players that I don't think are going to play more than half a game. And so the name that I landed on is Rashid Shaheed.
Interesting. Going upside
here. Atlanta
here.
defense is pretty good, but they don't generate any pressure. And so the hope is that you do have the chance to have some of those longer developing routes against Atlanta, like we've seen Tennessee been able to accomplish on them. So my hope is that Shaheed, as that post route, go route option, is able to thrive with Derek Carr having a little bit more time to throw in this matchup, and they're able to get it to Shaheed. That could pay off if we get a bomb, but like easily get out like one catch. So I don't feel tremendous about that. And then on the other side, I was pretty excited to take Kincaid because he's like the only tight end with a like predictable week to week role outside of the top whatever that is like actually a lock to play this week for considerable snaps. So absent that, I guess I'm just going to do it. If I'm going to win with the most painful possible pick. So I'll go with Kyle Pitts. He's going to play. He's going to run routes. They're indoors. And I guess why not?
We're going down with the ship.
Yeah.
Potentially. I mean, Hospital Heineke is putting up fantasy
I think that
points.
they actually still have mathematical playoff champs. If they
do.
win and Tampa somehow loses to Carolina, they would actually still win the division, I'm pretty sure. So I guess why not?
Yeah. Go down with the ship, right? I mean, we're Pitts guys. Yeah. We're gonna go down with it. Leave a comment on who you think is going to win this. I think I have the most upside here.
Not good.
I just need Flacco to not fizzle out when I need him the most here. I need him to fizzle out in the playoffs versus Baltimore. Which, guys, iconic potential matchups we have here. We have a potential Stafford return to Detroit, and we have a potential Flacco return to Baltimore. I mean, just give that to us for narrative purposes in the playoffs, because in the playoffs it's all about making bets and watching good football, sans whoever wins that terrible NFC division, because dear God, it's bad. Look, the fantasy season is come and gone. You blink and you miss it. We talk about week 1 and how excited we are, and the next thing you know, we're here talking about what we learned, what we missed, and what we can do better. It's sad, but it's not over, because we're degenerates. And we have people like Bindles out here already doing startups. It's going to be that time of year. We have so much prepped for fantasy points this year. We're moving to 2 shows a week to handle all your dynasty needs, where we're going to have one pure market conversation show based later in the week. We're putting that together. We have giveaways, CJ Stroud rookie card to give away, Kyron Williams jersey to give away, signed, and then a signed Michael Vick jersey, all to give away this year through fantasy points. Can't wait to have that done. Guys, this has been a great time. Let's reconvene, same bat time, same bat channel next week with a review of our Super Bowl predictions and lots more fun stuff here at fantasypoints.com. Good night, everybody.